Welcome back to The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Callistra Farion. This segment, we take a look at oceans and efforts in the Caribbean to protect our oceans. I will have two officials from the Ocean Coordination Mechanism joining me here on the program. And the OCM is a collaborative governance framework established to enhance sustainable ocean management in the wider Caribbean region, including the North Brazil Shelf, and it aims to improve communication and collaboration among countries and also an intergovernmental organizations or IGOs to avoid duplication and maximize the effectiveness of protection of the ocean and work that is being done in that regard in the efforts in addressing marine challenges. And the key components of the OCM are there are a number of key components that is under the OCM and key aspects of the OCM, collaborative governance being one of them. Also, there is sustainable management, also enhanced communication, as well as a regional focus. It's looking at the entire region here. The blue economy development, which is an emerging situation here, an emerging sector, I should say, in the Caribbean, as well as addressing marine challenges for the protection of oceans and also the development and protection of marine protected areas. Joining me now, Ambassador Jerry Eno, who is Grenada's ambassador on the environment with responsibility for the blue economy as well, and also Alexander Gowan, who is a senior project officer with the OCM. Gentlemen, welcome to The Narrative.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Ms.
All
Farah.
right.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on. Now, this seems to be a huge but very important, very critical task. We see a lot happening with the oceans and the seas because of climate change. We see rising temperature, seawater temperature. We see an onslaught of sagas, particularly in Grenada. We see that happening. We hear of coral reefs that are dying. How important is this initiative, that is this collaborative approach that the OCM seeks to undertake? We can start with Alexander.
Yeah, great. So, as you said, my name is Alexander Gerva, and I'm a senior project officer with the Pro-Caribbean Plus project. Um, we all exist on one blue planet, and all environmental problems like climate change, as you said, are shared. But particularly, our oceans are extremely interconnected, particularly in the Caribbean Sea. Grenada is one of the lesser Antilles, but things that are happening in the Amazon actually affect the oceans around in Grenada. Lobster fishing that happens in Grenada affects lobster fishing all the way up to the Bahamas. So the entire Caribbean Sea sometimes is being thought of more as a lake than a sea because it's so enclosed by the islands and the continental South America and Central America. So collaborating on ocean issues is very important to maximize people's benefits. We have this ocean coordination mechanism to enhance the coordination. We're very excited that Grenada is now the chair of this ocean coordination mechanism. And the real idea here is that if we don't have healthy marine environments, then society and the economy can't benefit. So it's protecting the environment for a purpose, which is people.
Ambassador Eno, Grenada leading on this. You're the chair of the OCM. How does Grenada intend to lead on this very important mission?
So, thank you for having me, Ms. Farah. It is important that we demonstrate that lead. First, we must recognize that we need to do it at the national level first before we can move towards regional efforts. Here in Grenada, some of the things that we are doing strategically was the establishment of a Ministry of Blue Economy and Marine Affairs. This is one of the first steps to show that we are demonstrating that leadership at the national level. We are co-opting several of the divisions, including the fisheries division, the establishment of a coastal zone management unit that would take care of all of our coastal challenges and to protect that resource. Now, Grenada intends to mobilize the role of the chair is more of a champion for this initiative and this very important initiative. I am going to act as a champion for this initiative to ensure that the and keep our targets and our aims on track and in a timely manner. It is important that we understand, as Alex mentioned, the role and the connectivity of the region. So what we do in Grenada here is just as important as what Panama does, as what St. Vincent does. So we want to use this platform to showcase and highlight the need for that sort of a collaborative framework. Now, what you have several challenges that is affecting the marine space. You have the current ongoing sargassum challenge. You have sea level temperatures, as you rightly mentioned earlier. Now, you cannot have a replication of efforts or duplication of efforts happening in several islands, and Grenada is not knowing what St. Vincent is doing, and St. Vincent does not know what St. Lucia is doing. So the mechanism aims to bring together and to prevent that sort of a silo approach, because we are all competing for the limited resources, the financial resources to get these tasks done. So it is important that each country or each NGO or IGO knows what the other is doing. And the OCM aims to sort of bring that into one framework so that we are not operating in isolation. So that is how my approach for leading this is to showcase what we are doing, highlight, champion at the political level, speak to the heads of states, the ministers, and so on responsible for ocean and environment, as to let them know the importance of this. Just to highlight, there are some countries where the ocean economy is responsible for 60 and 70% of our GDP. So the ocean is very important to our Caribbean states.
And certainly, I mean, we're surrounded by water, and the oceans and the seas are part of our lives and livelihoods. So protecting it is absolutely critical. Alexandra, let me ask you, in terms of data, because data collection drives a lot of policy and action. If you can see the picture of what's going on, then you can plan better, you can respond better. How important is data collection and data sharing among the member states that are part of the ocean coordination mechanism?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And one of those classic things that they say, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So data and information is very important for management. As the chair, Ambassador would have mentioned, unfortunately, sometimes we operate in silos, not because that's what we want to do, but that's just because what's been happening. So one thing that the Ocean Coordination Mechanism is supporting is an inventory of database efforts in the region to try and figure out what gaps exist in the data, what gaps exist in those databases, but also how we can centralize them so that we can compare what's happening. We have different cultures of data collection. We collect data in different ways, different formats, and that means we can't really compare, and because we can't compare, we can't manage as well. So we are investing money in developing something called a marine data infrastructure for the region, which looks at what already exists, as I said, figures out the gaps, tries to fill those gaps, but also makes sure that when a donor comes and says, I have a great idea about data, I want to give money to data, that they give that to existing efforts or to those gaps, as Jerry said, so we're not duplicating our efforts, because that unfortunately happens a lot in this environmental world, but also in this world with donors, and we're trying to prevent that.
So, and then, of course, with that data sharing, you also need the left hand to know what the right hand is doing, as we say here in Grenada, that there is greater communication among the key players. So not just having the data and within the OCM having those conversations there, but reaching out. So when you talk about communication, how far does that effort reach out? Do you also engage the fishermen and the people who harvest sea moss and the divers, and not just, for instance, the ambassador's office and the Ministry of Fisheries, but down to the belly of the thing, the users of the ocean? Do you have a mechanism for keeping the communication flowing there? Because if they're not on board, this is not going anywhere.
Yeah, so If that one is directed at me, one thing that we're doing on the OCM, as Jerry would have said, we have the countries, we have these intergovernmental organizations, right? But as you're rightfully saying, the people we're working for are the people on the coast, right? To catalyze that action, we have something called a wide-ranging partnership. We're still figuring out exactly how we're going to do it, but one thing we're doing is planning an event at the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Conference later this year, which is going to happen in Cartagena, Colombia. Now that brings together a little bit of civil society, a little bit of academia, and sometimes even fishers. A few years ago, a fisher from St. Vincent, who was a part of the Caribbean Regional Fisher Folk Organization, CNFO, was recognized as a champion, and not everybody who is, or some of the most important people protecting the ocean are not, people, and I mean this with all due respect, like Jerry and I, who are wearing the suits and tie. So we're going to work on that wide-ranging partnership to make sure that civil society inputs are coming into the ocean coordination mechanism. In terms of on-the-ground activities, the project that's supporting ocean coordination mechanism is implementing on-the-ground activities in a number of OECS states through small grants programs. So that's trying to make sure that we have, short-term benefits in addition to this long-term vision for this grand kind of OCM thing. It's not just this kind of, as I said, grand vision. It's also meant to benefit people in the short term, but also we're incorporating those views through the wide-ranging partnerships which we're developing right now.
So that there are some results, and we can at least make some sort of headway in reversing some of the damage already done. Now, what, Ambassador, Jerry, tell me what is a blue carbon projects? When I look at one of the areas that you're focusing on under sustainable management, you talk about the restoration of the ecosystem, of course, and that, I remember the other day talking to you about the issue with coral and the dying of some of the coral. But what is a blue carbon project?
So one of the things, to bring it to the basic level, blue carbon is the ability of the ocean and the marine ecosystem to sort of absorb the carbon in the atmosphere. Now, to better understand the importance of a healthy ecosystem. Now, ecosystems by themselves provide a service without any help. The mangroves that we have on our coast, they filter the water that's coming down from the rivers, coming down from the drains. The mangroves, the seagrass beds, they provide what we call ecosystem services. And coral reefs by themselves in existence provide homes for our fish, our economically important fish, our snappers, our lobsters, as Alex mentioned earlier. Now, these things have existing value. They have a value that just by being there, they provide a value. They provide an ecosystem service. So what we try to do is to place a value on those ecosystems. Now, those ecosystems, in order to get funding, to get resources, to protect them, you have to demonstrate that they have a value to the policymakers. Now, all time know that politicians sometimes look at numbers and figures and financial. So it is important that we identify the value of those resources just by existence without even extracting anything from them, without extracting any fish, without extracting any lobster. What we need is to show that there is a value in that coral reef just being healthy and providing the shore protection. The coral reef helps protect Grandlands Beach. A healthy coral reef outside of Grandlands Beach is preventing our Grandlands from washing out because the wave action is dissipated by the coral reef being out there. So we have healthy reefs to protect our Grandlands Beach. So in a nutshell, it is the value, the economic value that is derived from that blue space, whether it's through shipping, coastal tourism, fishing, fish farming, sea moss farming, and so on. So that is what when we say blue carbon.
But even as we establish blue carbon projects and we do certain things, we still have, for instance, on land activities where we have to have agriculture. Farmers have to use fertilizer. Well, I don't know if they have to. I shouldn't say they have to, but farmers use fertilizer and other chemicals. There's runoff. Everything that happens on land and gets into a waterway eventually makes its way to the ocean. People are dumping their plastic bags because we still have not totally removed the use of plastics. May never be able to achieve that. So we have all of these things that are happening just by us just living day to day that are having a tremendously negative impact on this very resilient but very delicate ecosystem out in the oceans. How do we address this fast enough, and particularly how does the ocean coordination mechanism help to put some speed into how fast we address this so that we can get results faster and stem the tide of disaster that we have been courting?
So Alex will get some more of what OCM is doing, but what I want to get at first is what we need to do locally, homegrown, first. Practice good, basic everyday lifestyle practices to ensure that you don't litter. Now, you let go a plastic bag or plastic bottle in the drain, it ends up on the coral reefs, smothers the coral reefs. The farmers, I know the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment would have programs that would look at trying to educate the farmers on different and new agricultural practices so that they don't put their farms very close to the river, because you try to create a buffer, a vegetative buffer between the farm and the river so that the runoff doesn't get directly into the marine environment via the rivers. No, that is just what we can do at the local level. Now, Alex would speak about the planned activities of the OCM as it relates to that particular initiative.
So yeah, about changing a lot of the bad habits that just became a way of life for us, Alex, that are such threatening actions. How does OCM seek to address those challenges?
Yeah, I'm very happy that you asked this question. It kind of, reflects, Ms. Faria, that you have a deep understanding of how these things work. And in particularly in the Eastern Caribbean, in the islands, we like to talk about from the ridge to the reef, right? And these two things are deeply interconnected. As it relates to those specific problems, I'll be very honest and say that, well, actually, in one island under one of our small grants program projects, we are working on ridge to reef issues specific to agriculture. But generally, with the oceanation mechanism, we are not dealing with the underground activities. But what we do is something called a strategic action program for oceans, and that will prioritize the issues that the region is facing. And because the region has a united voice on the marine issues, when we go to donors, they're more willing to give money, right? When you go to investors, they're more willing to give money because, if you just stop, let's say, for example, plastic pollution to use the tri-island states of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, if you stop it only in one island, the plastic is just going to float over from another island. So the strategic action program says, as a region, this is what we want to do on these issues. Let's see, we're just finishing one strategic action program this year, and we're about to develop the next one for the next 10 years. We'll see what the priority issues are. I'm sure that, and I'm not as aware of this, Ambassador may know more. There's a global plastic treaty being negotiated right now. And I feel like the strategic action program will say, listen, as a Caribbean region, this is how we want to deal with plastic. These are the kind of projects we want you to fund. And then the donors will give the money, and that will begin to come down to the countries in terms of on-the-ground implementation. Yeah.
A global plastics treaty, Ambassador?
Well, it is. These treaties are, to be quite honest, very difficult to come by to have a final document. Just an example, the BBNJ treaty, which looks at biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, it took 20 years to get where we are now in terms of the agreement that is ready for ratification and signing. So Grenada would have signed on to that legally binding treaty December of last year, but we will ratify hopefully in some weeks. Now, the reason why we have to take an international approach for dealing with plastics, high seas governance, and so on, is because it is all interconnected, as Alex mentioned earlier. It's one ocean. Doesn't matter how far you are, at some point in time, that circulation pattern will carry that same water right around the world. So it is important that we deal with these things, these matters, as a collective. And that is why it is important that we have the OCM, have a framework like this in place to ensure that we look at this as big as we can, as a region, as a sub-region, because there is no one country that can solve one of those problems. Because as Alex mentioned so rightfully, that what we do in our island affects the other island. So it is important that we are all on the same page. Now, as it relates to the plastic treaty, the negotiations are ongoing. Ambassador Safia Son is working steadfast on this, representing Grenada at the negotiations. So based on my reflection, the treaty is not ready yet. It's still in the developmental phase with the partners. So it is among one of the treaties. There are a number of other issues that we can speak about that require international um, negotiations and discussions. You have things like the IMO greenhouse gas strategy to reduce emissions from ships um, in an effort to mitigate against climate change. You have
Mhm.
BBNJ. You have the International Seabed Authority, which is looking at deep sea mining beyond national jurisdiction as well. So these are all negotiations and conferences that require international effort to manage the challenges that we face within those spaces.
And when we talk about the impact on the environment and the plastics and pollution and all of that, sometimes well, we talk a lot about the responsibility of the bigger nations, that they're not really ponying up to help solve a problem that they largely created. Are we leveraging? Is there anything that we have that we're leveraging, for instance, on this ocean coordination mechanism to get the support of some of the bigger nations to assist in making all of this work as best as possible?
So, I mean, I can quickly
Alex,
respond.
Alex,
Yeah,
yes.
I can quickly respond. I think, so I work for the Ocean Coordination Mechanism, which ultimately means I work for the countries, right? So I have to be very careful with what I say. It's really based on what the countries want. But, the idea here as well is that we will have a coordinated voice on ocean issues. So if we want to do what you described, we have more power because we're more countries. I think in that case, I'll probably just leave it at that. Because as I said, it's driven by the country, so I don't want to speak out of place. But it's just, we have more power as a bloc. And that's something that we should leverage because as you said, a lot of these problems are not literally, they're not created here. So we need to leverage our collective weight to address those problems and to lobby the countries which have the resources to solve them, but also have are kind of closer to the genesis of these problems.
More and more to the blue economy and looking at the blue economy as a source of economic development for the Caribbean, because the blue economy, it was always there, but it's sort of now a new thing where we are coordinating and focusing our efforts and looking at the development of various aspects of it. How important is it for us to, how fine a line do we walk here between conservation and economics? And how does the ocean coordination mechanism seek to help with the balance of that?
Yeah, is that one for me?
That's for you, Alex, and I'm
Well,
sure that
honestly,
Ambassador Eno will chime in after, because Grenada is talking a lot about its own blue economy.
well, this one is very close to my heart, right? Because my background is actually environmental economics. So this question you're asking of the cost versus the benefit and how you balance both, is really important. And I think at the end of the day, you really have to ask the question about human well-being. You know, how are people doing? Do they feel like their lives are better? It's not just about having more money or a trade-off between money and environment. It's about how are people doing? And I think sometimes what you're describing can be a challenge, but the reality is, you know, we talk about blue economy. Blue economy has existed for a long time. You know, your parents, your grandparents have been building ships, have been harvesting things. You know, one thing I always like to say is Carriacou, if I'm correct, and I really hope I'm not setting out of place, doesn't it literally mean something like island of the reefs, I think, or is it not an indigenous word from you know earlier times? So we've been living from the ocean for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the idea here is that if we preserve it, we'll get more benefits from it. And as Jerry said, you know, many of these things, they deserve to be preserved just because they exist. You know, who says that we as humans are better than fish? But the truth of the matter is as well is that humans have to benefit. So that's the whole thing. We have something in there called, or our principle that drives us is called the SDG wedding cake. And it puts the SDGs on a couple layers, and the base layer is the environmental SDGs, then society, and then economics. So without a healthy environment, you can't have healthy societies and you can't have healthy economies. So that's the kind of guiding principles for our work.
And yes, Carriacou does mean Isle of Reefs, Land of Reefs,
Okay.
and it's from the Kalinago, the Carib people. It's Cuckoo or Keriuku. Yes, so we would learn
So
something
I
today.
just wanted I just wanted to add a bit on this, Ms. Ferrer. The idea behind the blue economy, the concept, obviously it's Alex would know it's an environmental economic construct that looks at utilizing the resources in a sustainable way for the current generation and future generation. So it is important that whatever we do, we have the future generations in mind. Now, there are areas of the blue economy that we call the new and emerging areas. So we're looking at things like offshore renewable energy.
Okay, Ambassador, I seem to have lost you. I seem to have lost you there. Yeah. Yes. So you basically have 2 minutes left though, because we have run over our time slots. Interesting topic. So go ahead. I lost you for a minute there.
Oh no, it froze again, I think.
Yes. So sorry about that. I have no idea what's going on with my internet.
Your internet is having environmental issues.
So I just wanted to before we go to say that the blue economy is something that can give us additional economic activities if we go into the new and emerging areas of the blue economy, like fish farming and so on in Grenada is almost non-existent. Aquaculture, mariculture, offshore renewable energy, tidal energy. These are the emerging areas that the blue economy would go into, and that's where we as a ministry are looking to explore offshore wind, tidal energy, fish farming, and so on. These are the new emerging sectors. But also, importantly, we have to look at strategizing and developing the existing economies, the fishing sector, what we can do to improve the fishing, what we can do to sustainable utilize our coastal resources. So it is not just the blue economy is there and we're just going to send out more boats, catch more fish. We have to look at a strategic approach with conservation and sustainability at the backbone of whatever we are doing. And the OCM is always advocating for sustainability. This is the core of what we try to do.
Yeah, we can't take all the fish today. We need to leave some for tomorrow. I saw some major fish farming operations in China, and certainly it is something that we can do here as well and take less out of the ocean and breed. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining me on The Narrative, and best of luck to us on the ocean coordination mechanism. And I look forward to having you back as you move forward with this program, so that we can continue to educate and raise awareness among the public on this matter. Thank you so much, Alexander Gervin and Ambassador Jerry Eno, for joining me on The Narrative. This is The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Callistra Farrier. More when we come back.